Chain of events, cause and effect. We analyze what went right and what went wrong, as we discover that many outcomes can be predicted, planned for, and even prevented. I'm John Chidgey, and this is Causality. Causality is entirely supported by you. If you'd like to support us and keep the show ad-free, you can by becoming a premium supporter. Premium supporters have access to early release, high-quality versions of episodes, as well as bonus material from all of our shows not available anywhere else. Just visit engineer.network/causality to learn how you can help this show to continue to be made. Thank you. CrowdStrike. Since the first computer networks were designed and built, they've been transitioning from fully trusting and fully open to ever more locked down and restricted, primarily due to malicious actors. Like it or not, when human beings create something immensely useful, it seems as though there's a minority of other humans that find a way to abuse it or to take it down. When we use a technology increasingly to manage our lives, that becomes an enticing target for potential financial gain, as well as to some malicious actors that just want to watch things fall apart. And so, we are forced to defend our computer systems and networks with ever more complex tools, and the term cybersecurity was born, where we look at how to protect our systems from threats of different kinds. We covered this quite recently on episode 52 about the Colonial Pipeline and the importance of having a Chief Information and Security Officer, or CISO, a formalized role since about 1995, whose role is to maintain the security of information and operations within a company. The CISO would ensure that cybersecurity tooling was present in IT and OT systems that began with driving for what was originally called antivirus software, and that would be installed on all corporate machines. Whilst AV software is available to the public, CrowdStrike, formed in 2011, launched the CrowdStrike Falcon product in June 2013, but rather than competing in the personal computer market, like McAfee, Norton, and Bitdefender, amongst others, they focused instead on the corporate market. Whilst initially a traditional antivirus, over time Falcon was extended to include endpoint detection and response functionality, that's EDR for short, and was integrated into a cloud control and monitoring platform to allow a business to monitor and intervene on their entire network of machines. The goal was to prevent not just traditional malware injection styles of attack, but to provide a secure backdoor into the computer system for rapid sanitization efforts and recovery. In order to ensure that as many devices as possible are protected, most modern systems in this category push for a rapid update and deployment for all of their software. Whilst Falcon is more than just an antivirus scanner, we'll be focusing on that component here and what went wrong in July 2024. For that matter though, just how do traditional AV scanners work? Traditional antivirus software uses a definition or signature file that contains file sizes, contents, checksums, or in a word, patterns that match known malware. The scanner inspects every file on the computer to determine if there is a match to known viruses or malware. The problem with this is that patterns change every time the code used to create a piece of malware is modified and recompiled in any way. The core intent of the malware will likely work in the same way, but it will then avoid detection by conventional AV solutions. CrowdStrike, amongst other things, looks at executing processes in the computer system. However, it is still built on a similar concept of signature files, depending upon which aspect of Falcon we're looking at. Falcon refers to some of their update files as channel files, and these operate with the same basic intention. However, they contain data that is interpreted into executable code that updates what the sensor detects whilst it's running. Falcon has multiple template types that interpret these channel files to provide detection of various attack classes, and these are periodically updated, extended, and improved over time. The CrowdStrike Falcon platform has been widely regarded as one of the best available, with thousands of major corporations globally using the product, covering businesses like essential services, airlines, banks, and many more. It has even been deployed in mission-critical control system networks alongside more traditional IT systems. With that background, let's talk about the incident itself. In February 2024, an update for the Falcon sensor version 7.11 introduced a new advanced template type for detecting attack vectors targeting named pipes and other Microsoft Windows-specific inter-process communications, or IPCs for short. The new IPC template type was gradually deployed to CrowdStrike systems globally per normal update mechanisms. On Friday, the 19th of July 2024 at 2:09 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, CrowdStrike released an update via a sensor configuration channel, file 291 or C-00000291 star.sys, to Windows Falcon sensors globally. Within moments of the update, Windows machines running the Falcon agent entered into a blue screen of death or BSOD, or a perpetual boot loop. Airlines were impacted quickly, with many unable to issue boarding passes or process passengers or flights, leading to just over 5,000 flights cancelled globally, impacting airlines like United, Delta, American, Qantas, Virgin, KLM, Lufthansa, and many, many more. Banks impacted included Chase, Wells Fargo, Capital One, Westpac, ANZ, Commonwealth Bank, amongst others, with some payment terminals and automated teller machines or ATMs becoming inoperable. Government departments, hospitals, supermarkets, television broadcasters, radio stations all around the world that depended on Microsoft Windows for their day-to-day operation all failed at a massive scale, previously unseen. Upon receiving a significant amount of end-user feedback, CrowdStrike scrambled to identify the cause of the issue, and at 3:27 p.m., 1 hour and 18 minutes later, CrowdStrike rolled back the updated channel file. Now, this only prevented new failures from occurring, with system administrators around the world now picking through the remediation steps recommended by CrowdStrike in order to recover the machines from their boot loops and blue screens of death. The simplest fix was to remove the offending channel file from the machine, then it would boot normally. However, depending on the tools available to the sysadmin, this could be problematic. In some cases for physical machines, there was no way to access the machine remotely, and a physical visit, booting into a live CD, was required in order to gain access to the file system to remove the file before a clean boot would be possible. For some organizations, it would take multiple weeks before all of their systems could be fully returned to service. Let's talk about the investigation now. During that weekend, which was not much of a weekend for them, from Friday, Saturday, Sunday to Monday, both Microsoft and CrowdStrike worked together to further develop remediation strategies for sysadmins for the world over. Internally, CrowdStrike conducted their own post-incident review, or PIR, and published that on the 24th of July, 2024. Their post-incident review identified that the offending file, 291, had in fact passed internal stress testing on the 5th of March, 2024, in the CrowdStrike staging environment, and was released to production along with 3 others subsequently between the 8th and 24th of April 2024 without incident. The issue with 291 was described as having, and I quote, problematic content, I guess, that's one way of saying it, resulting in an out-of-bounds memory read, triggering an exception, end quote. Now, it wasn't until the 6th of August 2024 that the external technical root cause analysis was released that described specifically what had happened. So let's look at exactly what went wrong. To understand specifically what went wrong, we have to dig a bit deeper into specifically what the Falcon agent was doing and how it was doing it. The Falcon agent driver registers to be notified when named pipes are created. Then this against other undisclosed contextual information about processes running in the system that is then evaluated against the templates. In this case, the template whose patterns or source data was contained in channel file 291. But what's a named pipe for those that aren't Windows software developers? Well, a named pipe is, funnily enough, a pipe with a name given to it that can be either one-way or duplex for communication between a pipe server and one or more pipe clients. Any Windows system or application process can act as a server and a client, which then allows system or application processes to communicate with one another, which includes processes on the same computer. So what's a pipe, I hear you ask? Well, a pipe is just a section of the shared memory that multiple processes can use for communicating with each other. It's simple enough, really. One process writes data to the pipe, then the other process reads information from that pipe. Why do they have to pick names for this stuff that really isn't intuitive? Anyhow, I digress. The IPC template type, like all of the template types, has multiple components or stages that the channel file goes through before it's used. But the two of interest here to this incident are the content validator and the content interpreter. The validator's role is to confirm that the contents of the channel file are valid and correct before being handed to the interpreter, which then ingests the validated data for use by the sensor. The new IPC template type defined 21 input parameters. However, the content interpreter only expected to see 20 input parameters. Each input parameter, when passed to the interpreter, used a variety of matching methods, including regex pattern matching, some that include wildcards and others that were more specific for input validation. When originally developed, the 21st parameter had used a wildcard in its matching criteria. However, on the 19th of July, this had been changed to something more specific in one template instance that didn't include a wildcard. In case you're not sure what a wildcard is, it's a symbol that's used to represent 0 or more characters in a string usually. The most commonly used symbols for wildcards are an asterisk or a question mark, but different programming languages use others as well. For example, a wildcard for FUN asterisk, when compared with words like fungible, funny, and funnel, would respond with a match, pass, and move on, whereas words like full, fail, and fantastic would not match at all and would just fail. The interpreter up to this point had let the empty value pass due to the wildcard for the 21st value. However, now it failed and produced an out-of-bounds memory read error since it was unable to access the 21st value to inspect it. There just weren't that many in the array. Such a simple, junior, graduate, stupid mistake as poor array bounds checking. You should be doing that at compile time if you can, as well as at runtime. But you may be wondering, okay, John, that's nice, but how did such a simple mistake cause a system blue screen of death? As computer system attack vectors have increased in complexity and technical depth, products like CrowdStrike have opted to integrate with the operating system at the kernel level, generally through the use of kernel extensions. This is slightly controversial as this carries a potential risk such that anti-malware software now has the ability to interfere with normal machine operation. The claim is that in order to ensure maximum protection coverage of a machine, it's necessary to have a deep integration with the kernel and be loaded very early in the boot sequence. It is ironically a result of this early injection that led to the boot loop experienced on many impacted machines. The kernel loaded the channel file very early in the boot process, which failed and forced a reboot before anyone could intervene. Then it failed again, rebooted again, and, well, you get the idea. For those unfamiliar with computer architecture, a computer consists of multiple hardware components, including memory, a central processing unit or CPU, input-output or I/O chips, and graphics processing units or GPUs, just to list a few. The kernel sits between those hardware components and the operating system, noting that just because you virtualize those hardware components in a virtual machine, it doesn't mean you can't think of them as hardware in the traditional sense. Anyhow, the applications that run on the computer itself, for example, if you open a mail client or a spreadsheet application, ideally it doesn't interact directly with the hardware or the kernel. It negotiates with the operating system, which in turn interacts with the kernel, which in turn interacts with the hardware. Of course, that's a simplification, and I'm blurring things a little bit, but to suffice it to say, you don't want applications messaging with the kernel directly, since if they mess something up, the whole computer goes down. The two largest privately owned operating system vendors in the world, Microsoft and Apple, are both developing safer kernel integration methods without risking the integrity of the kernel itself. However, until this is delivered, in the words of CrowdStrike in their report, and I quote, "Significant work remains for the Windows ecosystem to support a robust security product that doesn't rely on a kernel driver for at least some of its functionality." End quote. Therefore, the reason this out-of-bounds memory error killed the machines was it was able to directly interrupt the kernel, leading to a panic and a blue screen of death. Once the machine was in a boot loop, it was wash, rinse, repeat until the offending file could be removed from the machine and allow a clean boot again. Had a standard application had such an error, one that didn't have kernel access, it would simply have killed that application and the operating system would have happily continued to function. One interesting fact that came to light only after the incident had been resolved was the question of why some organizations had practically all machines impacted whilst others did not have many impacted at all. The reason is that the bug only manifests when a named pipe was called, and some applications made heavier use of named pipes than other applications did. Therefore, simply through a random chance, some companies that used certain software that was running at the time were more heavily impacted. Though many applications create named pipes as a standard part of their operation, they may not happen as frequently as others do. Hence, the longer the outage was, the higher the likelihood the machines that use named pipes in their applications would crash. Let's talk about their testing. So far, so good, but the real question is how on earth did this get through unit testing at all? The unit tests, both manual and automatic, were about functional validation of the templates, types, security data passing through it, not on bounds or edge cases. The automated unit test files had a selection of 12 static test cases. They were designed to interrogate functional requirements under normal operation, telemetry, log creation, and triggering basic alerts in the system. In this specific case, the 21st field for all template instances included a regex pattern with a wildcard that effectively masked the out-of-bounds condition for incorrectly sized channel files that were under test. Additionally, whenever a new template type was created, it was tested against a specific template instance. However, not the other way around, meaning when the new template instance was developed, template types weren't all tested back against it. Mind you, a proper integration test end-to-end would and should have found this error, but that's not generally how large-scale software development is done. We test to the object's boundaries, ensuring interactions or messages between objects are exhaustively boundary tested. As they say, test to make and then test to break. Anyway, while some of the analysis following the event concluded that the incident was caused by a regex error, technically it wasn't, but rather the wildcard masked the error until it slipped out into the wild. So what do we learn from all of this? In software development, there's not much more to say. Make sure you test your objects and messages as thoroughly as you can for any out-of-bounds conditions that you can think of, not just array size. Also, I think that full regression testing is often skipped, but if you're doing decent enough automated unit tests, then it's a bit of extra work to try more end-to-end automated test cases, but it can catch issues like this. The more practical thing from an end user, or in this case, all of the system administrators in the world that were forced to deal with this, thanks to CrowdStrike's ineptitude, what can they learn from this? If I were to put it in a sentence, I would say, stop trusting so much and know the difference between anti-malware delayed updates and every other kind of delayed updates. CrowdStrike, prior to the incident, supported a standard time-delayed deployment setting whereby a customer could specify N for the currently available release, N-1 for one release behind the current release, and N-2 for two releases behind the current release. This is standard practice, and many conservative companies believe that they would be protected from an incident like this simply because they had their CrowdStrike updates set to N-2. Unfortunately though, this setting only applied to the software application and sensor applications installed on the machines. It did not apply to the channel files. Now, the explanation as to why that was the case almost makes sense. The justification goes something like this. For anti-malware protection in a global incident with a zero-day exploit just exposed, we need to ensure that the maximum number of machines are protected as quickly as possible to minimize the impact of it spreading further. Of course, the irony, the delightful irony of this position is that there are few precious examples of where this rush to release have significantly reduced the scale of a real-world malware incident. It's more the fear of such a malware outbreak that drove people to accept this as a good practice. Fear drives a lot of really bad ideas and practices, and not just in software engineering. The vast majority of system administrators that used CrowdStrike were unaware of this fact. And CrowdStrike did not really draw much attention to this, although I don't think it was malicious, but rather it had just become an accepted practice, and not just for CrowdStrike. It meant that whenever anything went wrong, the maximum possible number of machines would have been impacted, and they were. The accepted practice in software and operating system updates is to use a ringed deployment approach whereby different classes of machines are given updates at different times. For example, a lower-risk software update server or log aggregator machine might have their updates applied first, and after an agreed period of time without incident, the next ring of high criticality machines would be updated. It doesn't need to be ringed in this way either. You could just as easily pick one subnet of machines, if you're still doing that, or a limited list of machines of various classes. There's many ways you can go about it, but the point is to stage the deployment to minimize the damage if something goes wrong along the way. The CrowdStrike channel file update process at the time didn't allow this, and it really should have. Let's talk about the aftermath. A patch was provided on the 27th of July 2024, some 8 days after the incident had occurred, that would ensure that the sensor content compiler validated the array size, and such an erroneous channel file, were it to slip through again in the future, would not impact operability. CrowdStrike introduced additional unit test cases, and improved test coverage was added for improving fault detectability, with all existing templates extensively regression tested. And these are all, frankly, basic and good software development practices. However, ultimately, the real question is, what are all of the CrowdStrike customers doing as a result of this incident? There are no concrete, publicly available estimates of how many customers CrowdStrike have lost as a direct result of this incident. However, a report published by Germany's Federal Office for Information Security, or BSI for short, stated that 1 in 10 organizations in Germany that were affected by CrowdStrike were dropping their current vendors' products. The report didn't definitively state if that meant CrowdStrike, but we can infer that for the most part it would have. The interesting thing is that IT departments select the product, and many IT departments think that the benefits of protection against potential threats is worth the occasional catastrophic incident. Yeah, I know, right? Interesting. Customers demanded that there was a delay mechanism of some kind that could be configured on a per-installation basis of the deployment, staging, and timing for rapid response content, which includes channel files. CrowdStrike have since provided increased control, as they say. However, many system administrators are not convinced that it goes far enough. A few weeks ago, at time of recording, under the channel file update controls for rapid response content channel files, system administrators can select one of the 3 options in the CrowdStrike server. Early access. Receive rapid response content updates immediately following successful internal testing and deployment to the CrowdStrike assets. General availability. Receive rapid response content updates in a phased rollout after successful deployment to early access customers. Or pause updates. Your sensors won't receive the most up-to-date telemetry, threat detection, protection, or vulnerability identification capabilities. End quote. Certainly better than before, but many have requested an additional delay option between general and pause. CrowdStrike's share price dropped by 32% in the 12 days following the incident, causing a loss of market value of $25 billion. CrowdStrike's own shareholders filed a class action lawsuit in Austin, Texas for damages, claiming that CrowdStrike executives had defrauded investors by claiming their software was adequately tested. 2 other lawsuits were filed relating to travel impacts as a result of the incident. As of the time of recording, and despite many threats from Delta Airlines to sue for up to $500 million in damages, no end-user companies have filed a lawsuit against CrowdStrike. Many in the IT industry are holding their breath regarding this, as the legal agreements waive the software company from any liability. However, this has not been adequately tested in court, and certainly an incident of this magnitude is the first of its kind that could warrant a genuine legal challenge. On the 24th of September 2024, Adam Myers, Senior Vice President for Counter-Adversary Operations at CrowdStrike, apologized to the House Homeland Security, Cybersecurity, and Infrastructure Protection Subcommittee, stating, and I quote, "We are deeply sorry this happened, and we are determined to prevent this from happening again. We have undertaken a full review of our systems and begun implementing plans to bolster our content update procedures so that we emerge from this experience as a stronger company." End quote. Yay, I suppose. Now, this is the first time in the history of Causality to date that there's been an overlap between an incident and my professional career, my day job. I was asked by a group of IT, OT, and cybersecurity leads in my company to run the internal investigation for my division into CrowdStrike. The internal investigation that I ran took 6 weeks, and I delivered a report that was 13 pages long with 11 recommendations. I interviewed just under 20 people during that time and worked closely with my cybersecurity colleagues. For perhaps obvious reasons, there's a great deal I can't share about what specifically happened within our organization. However, there are a few items I would like to touch on regardless. Our division uses multiple distributed high-availability nodes, with most of our critical server infrastructure virtualized, with alternate recovery backdoors into our systems. Heavy use of snapshotting, distributed backups, and so on meant that our OT department pulled together and delivered a relatively rapid recovery from the incident. I'd be lying if I said we didn't have a few outliers, namely those few remaining physical machines in different remote locations that required an in-person visit to rectify them. Those took a bit longer to resolve, but having said that, they weren't considered mission-critical machines. We'd done some pre-planning about emergency recovery several years previously, of which I was also involved, and I'm proud of that effort, tough slog that it was at the time, because it paid off when prioritizing recovery sequencing following the incident. Now we, like many other companies, struggled to block the updates from CrowdStrike and are now building additional protections at a basic level that we can deploy if needed should something like this happen again. I'm lucky to work in an organization that has a switched-on OT and cybersecurity team. Not everyone is so lucky, believe me. I know this from past experience in other roles I've held. As a final note about the internal investigation, we chose to go beyond CrowdStrike and have initiated reviews for all software update practices for all operating systems and applications on our critical systems to ensure they are all of the same standard. Whilst we haven't seen any issues in those other spaces of late, it's better to be safe than sorry. The irony of this incident is something I just can't shake. That a product that's specifically designed to protect you from unplanned outages caused an even bigger, global-scale outage. It's not something any company would ever want on their resume. Ultimately, though, it highlights the importance of thorough testing, especially in systems that can have such a dramatic failure mode if you get it wrong. It also highlights the fine balance we face between protecting our systems from malicious actors against update frequency and the risks that poses as well. It's never been more challenging, I think, to be a systems administrator. Taking great care to have out-of-band recovery methods available to you, snapshots wherever you can, recovery prioritization pre-planning, because they will all help in recovery from malicious and, well, incompetent-driven incidents like this. But then the responsibility of managing deployment of any updates, that's still on you as the sysadmin. If you're unclear how a product works, seek clarity, test it, try it. If there's a route to grab updates, build a firewall rule or something to block it just in case you need it someday. Just disable it until you do need it. It's not enough just to trust a vendor with the safeguarding of the system that you administer. It's your job to protect your system, not theirs, yours. CrowdStrike's rookie mistake just shook the cage and woke up a lot of administrators that were perhaps a little snoozy behind the wheel. Well, they're awake now, and if CrowdStrike fail again, they may not bounce back so well from it. If you're enjoying Causality and you'd like to support us and keep the show ad-free, you can by becoming a premium supporter. We have support options via Patreon, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube memberships as well. Just visit engineer.network/causality to learn how you can help this show to continue to be made. Thank you. A big thank you to all of our supporters. A special thank you to our silver producers, Mitch Bilger, Shane O'Neill, Jared Roman, Katarina Will, Chad During, and Ian Gallagher. And an extra special thank you to our gold producers, Stephen Bridle, Kellen Frodelius Fujimoto, and our gold producer known only as R. Don't forget, by popular request, official Causality shirts are available again for a limited time, with different drinkware and stickers also if you're interested in that. Visit engineer.network/store for details. Causality is heavily researched, and links to all materials used for the creation of this episode are contained in the show notes. You can find them in the text of the episode description of your podcast player or on our website. You can follow me on the Fediverse at Chidgey at engineer.space or the network at engnet at engineer.space. This was Causality. I'm John Chidgey. Thanks so much for watching.